Hi, good evening, and well, day 28. 2 more days to go on my challenge for 30 days. I've been doing quite a lot of research today because I'm trying to put together a talk for this talk I'm doing for Fidelity, which I've got to have a rehearsal script together, a bit late on that already. But I'm also talking about trans issues at the Professional Speaking Association convention, and I've been doing some workshops on trans as well. And I've been looking quite a bit at the research that's been going on for numbers. How many people are trans? How many people are gay, lesbian, non-binary? And these figures are really, really hard to yeah, to ascertain. I was doing some work with the Health Education England, and we were talking about that at the workshop, and just how difficult it is to monitor for this information. Um, I think the thing is that so many people are still really, really frightened about coming out. Ooh, just realised I left my television on that was running in the background, so that's now out. So some of the research I've seen has been showing quite a significant growth in the numbers of people who are now identifying as non-binary, NB. At the moment, that's sort of reckoned to be about 1 in every 200, but it's increasing quite significantly. So that's probably going to end up heading towards 1%. The numbers about the number of people who are intersex has increased. The number of people who are trans, that's reckoned to be somewhere heading around the sort of 1% mark. In this country, the figures are lower than the ones that have been showing up in the States. Although interestingly, numbers of people who are gay, when the arguments about equal marriage were coming out, the number that was being quoted then was around about 6%, and that's a number I've seen a long time around. I think Stonewall put that number forward probably about 10 years ago. At the moment, the Office of National Statistics is arguing that it's probably only about 2 to 3%. And the interesting thing that we're seeing is that the numbers of people who are identifying themselves as bisexual, is now exceeding the combined total of the number of people identifying as gay and lesbian. Now, what is interesting, I think, is looking at the age distribution of all of these statistics, which have been pouring out, numbers all over the place. But and what we're seeing is that it's in the younger age group, the 16 to 24 age group, the millennials. And those are the ones, that's the group where we're seeing the biggest increase. And in terms of bisexuality, for example, around 2% of young people between 16 and 24 are identifying as bi. Now, whether that's bi-curious or whether that's because it's becoming a little bit more hip and in to be bi, I'm not so sure. Or is it that people are now beginning to say, I'm no longer afraid to come out. I'm no longer afraid to identify who I am. And looking at the numbers of people over 65, for example, people of my age, it's a fraction, 0.4%. So what we're looking at and seeing is that nearly 5 times as many people in that age group, 16 to 24, identifying as bi compared to people over 65. And that's hardly surprising, I suppose. I grew up in a time when homosexuality was illegal. It was definitely not supported in any way. Being trans would have probably ended up having electroconvulsive therapy and all sorts of horrible treatments to try and cure us. So back in the 60s, 70s, it wasn't a good time. By the 80s, things were starting to come about and starting to change, and then boom, we were hit with the AIDS crisis, which got tagged as a gay disease, despite the fact that it isn't. It's a disease that affects everybody. So it's interesting watching and seeing how these figures are emerging, because at the same time, what I'm seeing is a growth, certainly in terms of trans opposition, we're seeing a significant growth in the number of people who are trolling trans people, being pretty awful and nasty towards trans people. That's growing. I've got my my TED talk that I did in October 2014. I get regular abusive comments on there. Not too heavy. I mean, I've seen that a lot of the stuff that Janet Mock gets, for example, is way worse. And Jack Monroe, my God, I cannot believe the amount of awful stuff that people chuck at them. It's horrendous. And that's just somebody who publishes cookbooks on how to cook on a budget, but identifies as non-binary. These are non-binary people are taking a huge amount of flack. Piers Morgan kicking off quite often about people being non-binary. So we're seeing a massive change. It's happening amongst younger people who are obviously far more open about their sexuality, about their gender. I think the whole area of sex and gender is beginning to get a little bit more confused. We had got to the point where it was sort of, it was all separate. Trans is completely separate from gender, but I think they're all beginning to merge up. And that's part of what I'm going to be doing in my TED Talk at Fidelity, is to try and help people to understand that this is quite a complex issue where we've got gender identity, we've got sexual orientation, we've got physical, biological sex, and we've got the way in which we express ourselves. And these four elements all play together in a very complex way. We've ended up with masses and masses of gender identity labels. Facebook have got 71, and they didn't even include them all. I think I've reached about 90 different labels I've seen around at the moment. And yeah, to be honest, surely we're just human. We're just people who like to express ourselves in a different way and are not prepared to be constrained by a rigid binary in either sexual orientation or in gender. We're breaking those barriers down. And we're getting more and more people now beginning to see the world in that rather cross-gendered way, looking, breaking down those rigid rules and boundaries. And that's surely what we've been trying to achieve. So hopefully we're going to get there. So it's just my thoughts. It's been an interesting day trying to unravel these statistics. It's very unclear. Still, most people still not happy about declaring who they are, but it is increasing significantly. Younger people definitely taking the running on that, and I just hope we can start to see older people beginning also to step out and say, look, hey, this is who I am. I think the nice thing to be seeing is the number of parents who are clearly openly supporting their kids' gender diversity, gender variance now, and that's a really good move. Because one thing I definitely know from the statistics I'm looking at is that kids who don't get support are 4 times more likely to end up self-harming, attempting suicide, using drugs, becoming HIV, getting involved in sex work, all the bad sides of being rejected and humiliated by society. Okay, so that's just my thoughts for tonight. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.